Most auditors have been faced with having to aggregate vendor spend on a financial audit. Depending on your sources and the quality of the data, this can be time-consuming, difficult, frustrating, and in worst-case scenarios, incorrect and/or incomplete. The cost to a company? Non-compliance, potential fraud, and lost money. As today's example, we have been tasked with aggregating spend by vendor and comparing it to approved vendor spend limits. Although this sounds simple, if you have inconsistent data entry or multiple data sources, it can be difficult to match vendor records. For our example, we have a master approved vendor list and transaction listings from 3 different locations. If you need to accomplish this using just Excel, how would you do it? Maybe you would sort each listing by vendor. In doing this, you may find that you have multiple similar entries that may apply to many vendors. In our example, just on the first page of our Tampa records, it looks like Adeline Shoe and Alejandro Creamery have multiple names that apply to the same vendor. And you've got 3 different listings to go through. To accomplish a review, it would take hours to manually review each listing, identify potential duplicates, and then figure out a way to summarize them. To accomplish this with a tool like TeamMate Analytics, you can do so much quicker. First, I'll append the transactions from my various locations using TeamMate Analytics Append Sheets function to create a single transaction listing, and I'll call it All Transactions. I'll choose Manipulate Worksheets, Append Sheets. I'll choose my 3 locations and click OK. A new sheet is added to my workbook called Appended. And I'll rename this sheet All Transactions. Next, you determine your rules. After a review, I see a multitude of differences in how company entities are named. For example, looking at the company Fictional Supplies, I see it has records as Incorporated, INC, INC period, and blank corporate designations. My rule must be to get them all to show the same corporate designation or none at all. So I've developed a list of how to change each different corporate type to remove it from the company name. I'll replace these terms with a blank, and now I just run my normalization tool. I choose Manipulate Fields, Normalize Fields. I choose Supplier Name as the column to normalize. I'll select Substitute Words and Substitute Whole Words Only. I'll choose my list and click OK. Notice it has removed those company designations. However, some of our records have a space at the end of the supplier name. I'll run Normalize Fields again. I'll choose Supplier Name as the column to normalize and remove leading, trailing, and multiple spaces and click OK. Now we see those trailing spaces have been removed. The vendor names have been standardized, and we can now summarize and group data by vendor to aggregate spend. In order to match these vendors' transactions to another data set, the approved vendors list, we'll need to normalize the vendors to make these match. I choose Manipulate Fields, Normalize Field. I choose Supplier Name as the column to normalize. I'll select Substitute Words and Substitute Whole Words Only. I'll choose my list and click OK. I'll run Normalize Fields again, removing the trailing spaces. Now that both lists have been normalized, I've got 2 tasks. First, aggregate spend by vendor, and then compare total spend to approved amount. To do so, I'll summarize all transactions by vendor. I'll choose Summary, Quick Summary, Supplier Name, and I'll sum on amount. We now have total spend by vendor. Now to test if you have exceeded spend to any one vendor, you'll need to compare aggregate spend to the authorized spend amount shown on the approved vendor sheet. To do this, I need to add the vendor authorized spend amount field to the aggregated spend listing. I'll convert this pivot table to a table, then I'll choose Manipulate Worksheets, Join 2 Sheets, choosing Supplier Name Summary for Sheet 1 and Approved Vendors for Sheet 2. I'll match on Supplier Name for both sheets, selecting rows that match, and I'll click OK. I've produced a spreadsheet where the first 2 columns are the summarization of the transactions at my 3 locations by vendor, and columns C, D, and E are from my approved vendors list. To identify if I have any vendor spending above the approved limit, I'll extract all records where the sum of the total spent is greater than the approved amount. When I sort this list, we can see the Fictional Supplies record. The spend from the 3 locations contains the data for the records that contained Incorporated, INC, INC period, or had no company designation at all. Had we not done this normalization, the spend on Fictional Supplies would have appeared to be under the spend limit, rather than almost $300,000 over the spend limit. What we've been able to do is complete the aggregation for the vendors at 3 locations accurately, identify vendors out of compliance with policies, and test our complete data set as opposed to sampling. And we did it all in less than 5 minutes. We recognize that this is just one example for aggregating spend. You may set additional rules and have other normalization that you need to do, but this is an example of the process to go through. Watch for further videos to help with conducting your audit analytics. If you have any questions or suggestions for future topics, please contact us at www.teammatesolutions.com.